Hey guys, Kit here of Burn One with a new deck profile with DanMachi coming out soon. I figured I'd do a meta list deck profile here so people have a place to jump off from and understand how the deck is normally played, at least in the Japanese meta. And I don't see any real changes moving into the English meta for this deck. So we'll just get right into the deck list itself. So those people that are here just for the deck list, here it is. Just copy paste this and you're good to go. Generally, the overview of the deck is that it has really good power of destroying opponents' boards. So any metas where the board-based strategy is the main prevalent meta, like which is going right now in English, this deck can destroy those. The level 1 combo can get upwards of something like ridiculous, like 12k or even higher, due to how it works and the events that you use to be able to like manipulate power and always have consistently like triple combo or whatever you need essentially makes the deck very, very powerful. What's also really unique about this deck, it does run 12 events. It's something you don't see very often, but the events in this set are so powerful and like facilitates like you being able to like consistently do the same strategy over and over again. It makes it like really, really powerful in general. One of the drawbacks to this deck though is that it's kind of like a weaker 1k1 deck. So if you play into other 1k1 decks like over and over and over again and don't actually play against other board-based decks, this deck can sometimes not be as powerful because the finisher itself isn't the best. It is acceptable for what it is, but compared to other 1k1 decks, this finisher is not as good as those decks. Usually the other decks have way better reach than this deck does. But because of the general strategy of this deck and how it beats other like board-based decks very easily, being a 1k1 deck, so you have like kind of like a better tempo sort of compared to other like board-based decks that you're fighting against. The finisher itself is just good enough essentially. So let's go ahead and get into this list. First here is one of the staple cards we play 4 of this spell. It has at the start of your opponent's attack phase, you can pay 1 and clock yourself from the top of your deck, and you can bounce this card and another card back to your hand. It has a secondary startup effect, which we don't use in this deck. I believe it lets you play the level 2 or whatever that we don't play from a waiting room with this card if you pay 1 and sack this card. So this is like our plusing 0 early on, and this also guarantees us to have red in our hands a clock away. Card is pretty good. You can be in scenarios too where when you play this, you can bounce back your level 1 combo back to your hand and then play it again the following turn if you feel like you need to do that to usually recoup that. And you don't really have to do that too often. You generally do this effect like maybe once or twice a game. Essentially, like I said, it's not very powerful in the sense that it can't beat board because it only has 500 power, but at higher levels, it can fight other level 1s when you're level 1 or higher because of the cards you'll be seeing shortly. So we play this as a 4 off because we want some consistency and way to dodge reverse combos too at level 1 if you get to level 1 second. It's kind of a pretty good utility card overall, but like I said, you use this effect maybe once or twice a game. Next we have the Brainstormer, standard Brainstormer. You play 3 of it. The only good part about this Brainstormer, outside of its Brainstormer effect, is that anytime you use an event, you get a draw 1, ditch 1, so you can get in scenarios where you can, hopefully try to dig for your combo pieces or anything like that, or a climax off of playing an event randomly, or there is an event counter in this deck, so you can, end up drawing like cards that are not climaxes in your deck off of playing an event. But the effect only activates once per turn per copy of this card, basically. So yeah, if you want to do this multiple times in the same turn, you'll have to play 1, play an event, then play another one, then play an event again to be able to draw 2 cards and discard 2. And the Brainstorm itself is a search Brainstorm, which is not always the best type of Brainstorm, but it's a plusing Brainstorm with good effects, so why not? It also has Hasty in the name, which names in this are important due to the events. Next, we play this Drop Searcher, which is really, really good. What makes it so good is that it's also a level 0 bottom decker. So in this set, we don't have a lot of very powerful ways to like contest the board at 0. I would say this deck, for the most part, its level 0 game plan is kind of on the weaker side, but we don't really care because we're going to be slamming climaxes every turn and blowing up boards starting from level 1 and onward against other board-based decks. So in some horrible cases, you can be in the scenarios where you end up letting your opponent get a +1 or 2 at level 0, and there's nothing you can really do about it. What's really great, though, is that if you use this to attack into something and then you want to use the drop search effect again next turn, you can use that first bell card we showed to bounce this back to your hand and do it again. This also helps us have a consistency as far as getting our level 1 combo every game, because we can just drop search for it early on and so forth. Very solid card we play as a 3 of. Like I said, we don't have a lot of very good ways to contest board at 0, so having a bottom decker bomb is not bad. Once again, we have this Hastier card. It's really powerful. So this is what makes the deck so consistent. When you play this card, you can top check up to 3, add an event to hand, discard a card, and discard the rest. So this provides really good mill. But what makes this card really disgusting is its secondary effect, as you guys might have seen in our Ruby profile. I forgot the name of the card, but the level 1 that can stun your opponent's card. So if your opponent is playing standby, 4 to 8 standby, and they standby something out in the back row, you can play this card and stun that card in the back row, and it can no longer move up forward, which can be really detrimental for your opponent. There are times where, if they're not used to playing against this effect, if they try to play like early play level 3, so they can start playing their finisher at level 2 the following turn, you keep stunning the back row because we play this card as a 4 of, and making it so they can no longer move cards up front. Also in scenarios where you're winning the attrition war, as far as your opponent's hand size is getting really low, and you keep stunning their back row, and they can't move up their cards to at least get 3 attacks a turn, then in some scenarios you can just, have them lose attacks because they had no playables, essentially. What's really cool about this too, as you'll see with the events, is that even though it looks very weak, only 1500 power, this can get pretty big and fight other level 1s and live cross turn, essentially, or beat a level 1 and then live and then take it, absorb a damage, essentially. Card is very powerful, really great deck manipulation, really consistent on finding events you need or putting things into the waiting room that you need. This card is amazing, 4 of easily. This is something that got added on later. Where I get the translations from, they didn't have the exact translations for this, so I'll go ahead and translate it for you guys right now. Whenever you play an event for this card, you can pick this card and put it into your stock. And then has a startup effect, which is to tap itself and give one of your family characters or whatever the other effects or traits are, characters 1k power for the turn. And basically doesn't really matter here. So you can do scenarios where you're overhand size, play this, tap, give something 1k power, and then send it to stock. Or you can have this in the front row into an empty lane. Your opponent try to look for reverses. You can play an event, send this to stock, things like that. It has really cool scenarios of manipulating stock and extending hand size in a sense. Alright card, it's not the most amazing thing, but in games where you care about compression, your opponent can't really deal with compression by using stock swap or anything like that. You could just stock these away and just forget about them and build up a pseudo memory type of thing where if it's an area your opponent can't really contest with, you can just stock these away and gain some extra compression, essentially. Finally, we play this as a 1 of. It's our climax swapper in scenarios where we just need to swap climaxes to get the gate or the door. And then when you play this card too, you can swap cards in your level zone if need be to color fix for scenarios that are kind of rough. Play it as 1 of, just for the consistency as far as climax swapping goes. That concludes our level 0 game. It's pretty straightforward there. Like I said, if you notice, there's not a lot of really great ways to contest at 0 with this deck, but our main game plan here is get to level 1 and start looping combo as often as possible because of how powerful it is. So we'll move into the level 1 bell combo here. So right off the back, we have the climax combo. If you have the gate or the door in play, you can choose one of the following effects. You can search for a Hastier's Knife, or you can salvage a Hastier's Knife, which is the 1-0 event, which I forgot to put on the screen here, but we'll be hitting it pretty soon. And the other thing about this card is for every fire bolt in your waiting room, this card gets X power times the number of those cards. So X is 1500 times times the number of the fire bolts in your waiting room. So this card can get an extra 6k power on top of the 4-5 power it already has, making it 10-5 plus the 1k from the climax combo, 11-5 plus a tap for an extra 500 power, or any other ways you do pump it up, because there are other events that just give extra power, which is insane. So this is part of the the reason this combo is so good, if you've played Grisaya in Japanese at all, you know how great it is to be able to just like slam, or even Goblin Slayer, you slam a climax, get events to your hand to use next turn. In this case, it's kind of like Goblin Slayer because it's like kind of like Torch, where you can top check 4, add 1, and so forth, which is really powerful in itself as well, because you get really great deck manipulation, especially on your opponent's turn. When you know you get that 1 cancel out of your deck and you have like 5 free cards left, you can use the event to burn through those 5 cards essentially. Next, this is the 1/0 support. You play it as a 2 of. What makes this support so good is that it makes your specific 1/1 Pyeongchi event in your waiting room, or not in your waiting room, anywhere, basically -1 cost. So it goes from a 1/1 event to a 1/0 event, and that event itself is very powerful. We'll get to that very shortly, but it gives a huge power pump to your opponent, to your cards whenever you use the event too, while it's adding consistency as it lets you salvage. The secondary effect helps with deck manipulation as well as getting cards back to your hand. You can pay 1, rest this, and look at top X cards of your deck, where X is the number of the 1/1 event in your waiting room. So this can +1, so it can look up to 5 cards essentially, which is really powerful, and it's optional of the number of cards you look at, which is really good. So you can have some extra control from that, and then you pick a level 1 or higher card and add it to your hand. So this card can get any of your level 1 combos, other level 1 events, and so forth. Very powerful, very great deck manipulation tool. You use this occasionally to like build up more hand when need be, because you don't use your stock very much to do a lot of crazy things, and you do have the PR card that can run to stock to give you some extra, stock as the game goes on. So now we're moving on to the events. We play 4 of this Firebolt event. So you get to choose an X or lower character with either Family of Guild or a Hostess of Fertility in your waiting room, and return it to your hand, where X equals the number of Bell First Adventure in your waiting room. Bell First Adventure in your waiting room is actually this level 1 itself. So every copy of this in there, you can salvage another character that X or lower. So this card will always get you your level one combos if you have one in your waiting room, because at worst, if there's one in your waiting room, you can salvage a level 1 or lower. Otherwise, this salvages level 0s, which is still very powerful. You can just trade this card off for something else as well. Our next card here is the 1/1 event that I was talking about. So it's a 1/1 event that lets you salvage a character and then choose one of your Family Guild or a Hostess of Fertility characters, and that character gains 4K power for the turn. This becomes a 1/0 when you have the support out, which is really powerful. So you can pump your level 0s that are very weak at level 1 to beat over bigger cards, and then you also get the consistency of salvaging characters to build up your hand and set up your hand for future turns, which is really good. Like I said, events like this and the level 1 combo gain so much power that your opponent can never really contest any lane, because you're just pumping every lane so a ridiculous amount of power at the end of the day. And then finally, this is the Hastiest Knife that you get off of the combo itself. So if you don't have a character with either Hasty or Bell in the name, you can't play this card from hand, but you're always going to have that. And if you don't have a character with Bell in the name, you cannot play this card from hand or in counter step. So as long as you have a Bell, this is a counter. Otherwise, it no longer becomes a counter if you don't have a Bell in the name somewhere. And then you may play this card from hand without meeting the color requirement. So as long as you're basically playing the game, if you get stuck with red at level 1, you can still play this card. And then it's top check up to 4, add a character, trade a character to hand, and then put the rest in the waiting room. Very powerful card, a lot of manipulation. If you've played Goblin Slayer and stuff like that, you know how powerful that can be. The fact that you can play this without having color requirement too, it makes it somewhat a little bit better. There is that issue though that you have to have a Hasty or Bell in the name to be able to play this card, which you should always have at worst case scenario Hasty in the back row because of the support. And then you got to make sure you have a Bell out on the board somewhere to be able to play this as a counter, which usually isn't a big issue at all. And obviously play this as a 4 as well, along with the other events. Next, at level 2, we only play one level 2 card because there's no really other powerful level 2s we are looking at to, strengthen our strategy, because our strategy is basically win board every turn, slam climax every turn, and keep going there. So we have this level 2 here. The first effect, which is when it's placed on stage from hand, choose one of your opponent's characters and send it to memory. Your opponent sends that character to memory, puts that character from memory to any slot on the stage. So if you have any, like negative soul effects or anything like that you want to get rid of, you can do that, or remove markers. It's a nice added effect on there, but it's not the best. We mostly play it for the second effect, which is on play. You pay one discard card from your hand from waiting room. If you do, your opponent chooses a climax card in his or her waiting room, then return all cards in his or her waiting room other than that card they chose to the library and shuffle their deck. We basically do that, a little bit more pushing power at the end. If they're out like one climax and have like 20 cards in their waiting room, we can just shuffle 19 damage back into the deck. Pretty solid card overall. And whenever your opponent makes not like they can make choice, but they end up triple triggering or something, you can force a refresh in a bad timing for them, and they'll have to waste a lot of resources to get through the deck, since this comes out at level 2 if you'd like to play this at level 2. Solid card overall. You don't always have to use this card, but it's there, and you have easy access to it because of all the events you play. This is our early player of choice. As long as you have 4 more other characters on board, this gets -1 level on hand. And then it has another effect that for every marker it has, it gains 1500 power. And then this is whenever it's placed from hand to stage, you may put the top card of your clock into the waiting room. And then when this card attacks, if there's no markers underneath it, you may from your waiting room choose up to 1 Hastiest Knife and up to 1 Ushiwakamaru, and then put them face up underneath this as a marker. We don't play the other card, but we do play Hastiest Knife, so we can pump this by 1500 if need be. And it's basically you get extra marker compression through that if need be. And it can also, if you go through refresh and have the marker underneath, it puts the Hastiest Knife back into the waiting room, and you can get access for it like that if need be. So it's not very powerful. It's like a 9k early play healer, which is all right. What makes it so good is the condition is just 4 or more, and with the deck manipulation, we can burn through our deck and not have to worry about keeping 2 or less climaxes in our waiting room. So like early player card. And for the fact that we don't really have to deal with having power to beat board, it doesn't matter what our early play is. It being Bill as well makes it so our 1-0 counter or 1-0 Hasty Knife event counters still work basically. Next, we play this as a one of here. This is a kind of like an optional finisher, but it helps us get cards from the top of our deck for looking for climaxes, because a lot of times all we need is any climax to be able to swap into whatever climax we want. So essentially, we use this as a top check 5. On play, look at top X or X number of other of all your characters with whatever traits on board. Add 1 to hand. Secondary effect, which is pretty solid, is pay 1 discard a character, trade a character from your hand. And when this card attacks, if Hasty Knife is in your waiting room, so you basically always have to have that Hasty Knife. Like I said, it works in synergy with something like this early play. You'll always guarantee having the Hasty Knife in your waiting room. You may pay cost, so you pay 1, ditch 1, and deal 1 damage to your opponent. It's just like another little extra push you can have, essentially. You can use this card as well to set up for your next card here, which is really strong. Well, not super strong. It's not the best finisher, but at least the other bell helps build up off of that card. So this our finisher here is for each of your other for each other character with either family, guild, or hostess fertility. In the back row, this gains 1k power, so it becomes 10-5 essentially. Then as their effect, discard a card on play to heal the stock. Hand size doesn't really matter in this deck, so when you kind of go off with this card, you can just blow up your hand to just essentially heal a bunch of stock, and then heal down. It gets through anti-hit, which isn't really a problem right now in English, so you don't really have to worry about that. And it makes it so that if you have low stock, this actually replenishes stock, so you can play this with only 4 stock. Essentially, play 3 of these if need be with only 4 stock, which is good. You just got to give up hand size. The climax combo is if you have the gate trigger or pants or whatever you want to call it in your climax zone, you can choose one of your characters, and that character gains +1 soul for the turn, and the effect that if the opponent cancels their damage, you deal 2 damage. What's really cool about this card is you can set up a lot of good scenarios of hitting really good side attacks against level 3s, level 2s, whatever. Because if you're playing a bunch of level 3s in the front row, you play the climax, they have 3 soul, then you start giving them an extra soul here or there, and you could side for 1s in scenarios like your opponent's at 3-5. If you play 3 of these and then you just give a soul to each of them in the effect, you could start siding for 1, dodging stuff like Mushoku's tap counter and anti-damage and stuff like that. So you can swing it for 1. If they cancel, you can burn 2, and you do that 3 times. It's really, really hard if you're ahead in damage for your opponent to do shit about it, essentially, because they can't interact against side attacks. Downside to this card is, when your opponent starts clearing their board every turn and they don't really have crap to play, you end up swinging in for huge numbers of damage, which is really rough. What's really great about this combo, though, at least in bad scenarios, is that it does synergize well with this bell, being that you get a ping for 1, you get a burn for 1, and then if that cancels, you get the ping 2, the burn 2 effects off of this, and still be able to side if need be with a bunch of extra soul. Otherwise, you're swinging in for a crazy amount of damage. It's part of the reason why this 2-1 is pretty solid overall, is because if in scenarios where your opponent clears their board, you're going to be swinging huge numbers. So at least trying to decompress them a little bit with the 2-1 effect, with using this level 3 to finish them, helps a lot. Finally, once again, here's the deck list overall. You can take a look at it. The deck is super consistent. It does what it wants every game. If you're running into a board-based meta, this is probably one of the best decks to play into it. It's kind of like the anti-meta deck for the most part, because if everyone gets off of board-based decks, this deck becomes so much weaker. It doesn't matter, because most other decks assume their board is going to lose every turn, and they get they're like, oh, that's cool that this random 1 card gets to live because my opponent had a bad game. But generally, most 1k1 decks you play into already assume their board is going to die. So what they plan to do is have really crazy ways to add cards to the hand, get huge hand advantage like that, and have a really crazy finisher, is usually how those other 1k1 decks work. But since this is so focused on always winning board, you kind of lose out on the fact that your top end isn't as powerful, but you get so much consistency at being all the board-based decks. So like I said, this deck is really good depending on the meta. The meta we currently are in now, where your opponent, everyone's playing Mushoku essentially, and there's a lot of really good standby lists or board-based lists running around right now. This plays very well into that meta, and as that meta disappears, this deck gets worse and worse until once again we hit that board-based meta decks. All right, thanks for joining us, guys. I hope you enjoyed this deck profile. If you have any questions about DanMachi in general, you can leave comments below. Follow us on all our social media stuff here, listed here. And we hope to see you guys in the next video. Later.